This is Rani.
Hello.
She's my sister-in-law.
Yes.
Today is the first time Rani came to visit us in Vancouver.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever really been out of California.
Yeah, and I said, Rani, tell me about your life. Tell me what you've been through. And you started telling me, and I said, no, we have to stop. We have to record this because, you know, so many people go through similar stuff, and so many parents, they have no idea what their kids go through. And I have teenagers today, and I worry, and I feel like Rani has such a good testimony to tell us where she had been and how she got out. You love Jesus, you love God,
Jesus,
right?
saves. He's the one that saves.
Your life is totally different today. Your husband's life is totally different today. So this is the reason we want to share this testimony today, to help out so many people out there to get up, to be positive, to be out of depression. And for parents to understand more their children, if they're stuck in it, how hard it is. Tell me how it all started.
Okay.
Different drugs, what they are. I have no idea what
Goodness
marijuana
gracious.
is. I have no idea what other drugs are.
Oh, I can give
And
you
how
good.
you got stuck in it, how you got out, how you met God, and how you are where you are today.
Okay.
I know you have been through a journey.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so my name is Rani Raddican Anashenko. I am going to be 39 June 1st.
Oh.
Yes. Let's see, my life started out pretty rocky from the beginning. My mom had me a week before she turned 22. I was 6 weeks premature. The doctors told her that I wasn't going to make it, that I had a heart condition.
You were 6 weeks?
6 weeks early, yeah.
And you had a heart condition?
It wasn't a heart condition. Back then I had coital atresia, which is the webbing between fetuses. You know, they have webbing here, they have webbing here, you have webbing here, and in the throat. That's why doctors check the nose, ears, and throat. Well, it wasn't as, the doctors weren't as familiar with it back then, so they thought I had a heart condition when in actuality it was just the webbing in my nose. And babies' instincts are to only breathe through their nose when they feed and they sleep, so I was having difficulties. So I had tubes in my nose for the first year of my life. And,
was it like breathing tube and
to open
tube?
to open the nasal passage,
Oh, I see.
so I could breathe and function properly without complications. My mom even said at a year or so I yanked them out of my nose, scared her half to death. So yeah, so that was the beginning. I was in an incubator. I don't know how long I was in the hospital, but it was for a long time. I was born in Ventura, Simi Valley. Down south, LA, California area that way.
So was your mom, was she in a happy marriage at that point?
My mom wasn't married. Actually, my mom had met a man while she was in the army. They obviously had like a love affair, and she became pregnant, and they wed. My mom went to Georgia to live with him, and he was abusive. And so when he hit my mother when she was pregnant, she left him and came back to California to stay with my grandmother. And my grandmother was a pinnacle point in my life. She was so much to me as a child. She was my savior, my comfort. The only one that made me really feel safe and loved throughout my whole childhood until she passed.
Was your grandmother?
Was my grandmother.
So Rani, like as I see, like you have been dealing with drugs. Your daughter has been. Your mom has been, right? Were your grandma dealing with drugs too, or was she never?
You know what? My grandmother was the most amazing woman I'd ever met. Like, I believe she drank, and the marriage with my grandpa, it wasn't the most ideal, perfect marriage because obviously they divorced. They had 4 children altogether. I have my mom and my aunt, who I'm very close to my aunt as well.
Yeah, and I met her.
Yeah, it's my Aunt Nancy, yes. And then I have 2 uncles, my Uncle Dennis and my Uncle Billy. I really don't know much about them.
Okay.
They were crazy, rowdy kids.
Yeah.
They put my grandmother through a lot, and my grandpa through a lot, is what I've been told. But my grandmother, I never saw her drink or do anything as a child, and I never saw her with any men.
Okay.
It was always just me and her.
Yes.
You know?
Did anyone in your family ever know God? Do you know? Do you have any roots of Christianity?
My mom believes in God, but my mom didn't influence me to follow that path. When I was a child and I was going to elementary school, there was a woman and she did Bible studies.
Okay.
And when we'd walk from school, she would come out and, hey, come to my Bible study, come to my Bible study. So, of course, you know, being a curious kid, I was like, okay. So I went to a Bible study and I liked it. And she would take me to church, a Christian church. And that was my first probably exposure of the Word of God, you know, as a child. And I did that on my own. The bus would come pick me up. My mom would let me go to church. You know, she didn't tell me not to go. So she encouraged it.
So basically, you were not in a Christian family, but your mom was not against it.
No, not against it at all. Yeah. So I did get a little bit of exposure as a child, and I liked it too. It was more of a like a, how would you say it? You know, where they sing the hymns, and it was more of a, oh goodness, I can't think of the word.
Like a balm for your heart?
No, it was more of a classic church, you know, like where the older generation, you know, you sit in your pews, not so much like today, you know, like I've experienced different types of churches now, so yeah, it was just more conformed, I guess you could say. You know, they sing the hymns. It's more of
So was it more for older people, but
oh
for
yeah,
younger generation? Like
it was an older generation church. There, I mean, we had Sunday school, and there was a small congregation of children, but it was nothing like say Big Valley Grace, which is a church where I live, you know, and they're very large. I had minimal exposure as a child to God.
Okay, so tell me what happened. What went wrong?
My mom had rough relationships with men. She met my sister's father probably when I was like 4. We were still living in Canoga Park, which is down south of California. And we lived in an apartment complex. And you know, my grandmother, when I was little, she would always come pick me up from daycare, and she worked for Pacific Bell when Pacific Bell was still up and running, and so I would go to work with her.
What's the Pacific?
It's a phone company.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a phone company. She had a good job with the phone company there.
So you remember spending more time with your grandmother than with your mom?
Yeah, my grandmother was everything good.
Okay.
She, like I said, so my grandmother was always with me. You know, I was her angel, I was her baby, and I was her first grandchild. And so she would always come pick me up from daycare. I would always be with her on the weekends. There was a lot of time with my grandmother. I would build blanket forts in the kitchen. You know, she was everything good. I remember her always in her rocking chairs, crocheting. Drinking Pepsis, and she would smoke more cigarettes. And that's how I remember. You know, always crocheting sweaters and blankets, and just with me always when we'd watch movies or certain.
But she smoked.
She smoked, yes, she did smoke, and she smoked heavily. And so and then we're living in Canoga Park at an apartment complex, and I would always roller skate, and I would go swimming, and you know, my mom would let me go swimming with neighbors in the apartment complex. You know, these are strangers and stuff. And, but they were all very nice. And I think, let's see, so this is when she met my sister's dad. And I think the first actual exposure to something not so right, other than probably my mom's lifestyle, but the first one I really remember that was scary was my mom and Greg, which was my sister's dad, let this man stay with us. And he exposed himself to me and asked me if I wanted to perform certain sexual acts. And I was scared, and luckily I was still a smart little girl, you know. I was like, oh no, I need to go to bed. Oh, I'm tired, you know.
How old were you?
About 4.
And he?
And he tried to expose himself and have me engage in sexual acts. But like I said, I was still a smart little girl, so you know, he told me if I said anything, he would hurt my mom. And I just avoided him after that. And then I was so happy when they took him to the airport, and, you know, and he left. Shortly after that, we came to Modesto, where I live now. And my mom had a relationship with my sister's dad for about 11 years. And he drank heavily. And my mom drank heavily. And there was a lot of violence, not only acted out towards me, but lots towards my mom and him. He was an angry alcoholic, and I wasn't his child, so I think he took it out more towards me, because I don't remember really, I know my sister endured a lot, but I don't remember it being taken out on her physically or quite as verbally or mentally. Talking to me at the time, because when I was living with her, I was not such a good girl. I was a bad girl. I started smoking cigarettes. We lived in a mobile home park, so it was a community of people, and I started hanging around with the wrong people. My grandmother taught me how to drive, so I ended up taking her car.
How old were you at that point?
Gosh, I was 12, maybe 11. I was very little.
So you're just the same age as your son.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah, I was the same age as my son. And my son amazes me because he's such a different mentality than when I was at his age. And I'm grateful for that. I'm extremely blessed and grateful for that. So my grandmother wasn't talking to me because I had done that. I broke her heart. You know what I mean? I scared her, and so she sent me to go live with my aunt. And my grandfather was extremely sick. He was dying of brain tumors and lung cancer. And so during his funeral, my Uncle Dennis came and he took my grandma. And he took her to Florida. That's where he lived. He lived in Florida. And a year later, almost to the day, like, my grandma died. And that was sad and devastating.
So you were with your aunt at that point. Did your mom want you back home?
Oh, I'm sure she did. But I wasn't ready to go back home yet.
You didn't want to?
No, she eventually came to where my aunt lived and came and got me and brought me home. This was after she left her second husband, Billy. She was working and going to school at the same time. So she came and she brought me back to Modesto. And that's I basically was running amok. I already had that little bit of exposure to bad influences, in life. I was smoking cigarette. This is when I lived in Riverdale Tract, and it's alongside a river. So we would go down and we'd have bonfires, and we'd smoke marijuana, and we'd drink, and it was me and a girlfriend of mine, and we hung around with nothing but boys.
And that's where you live when you lived with your aunt?
No, my mom.
Your mom?
This is after my mom came
Your
and got
aunt, was she a good lady?
My aunt, yeah, she was a very good woman. She is a college-educated woman. She's a good mother. I mean, she's had her own experiences in life, but nothing as extreme, nothing as exposed.
Did she take you just because?
My aunt loved me. My aunt's always loved me. She was a big part of my childhood too. The positive aspect of it, the safeness of it. Like, my grandmother was always a safe haven for me. Always somewhere I felt loved. Always somewhere I felt special. Unlike the environment with my mom and my stepfathers.
So they understood that environment and they were trying to help you out.
They knew I was fearful and unhappy in the environment with my stepfathers. The relationship and the abuse I endured, I guess you could say.
So at this point you understand how important it is to have a strong marriage.
I do.
To have one husband once and forever.
Yeah, I understand. I understand God's law. I understand the reasons why He set down the rules and expectations of a man and woman together in unification. You know what I mean? I get that. Because I didn't have that to witness as a child. I didn't have that kind of exposure to what a relationship and a marriage should be, what a man and woman should be to each other.
So basically, your mom lived the life, she understood.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Well, yeah, she just... I mean, I don't know what kind of marriage my grandfather and my grandmother had. I know my mom said their family life was dysfunctional. And I know they got divorced when my mom was in high school. But she's very vague about all that stuff. I know the siblings, her siblings, and they were all very very cruel to each other, very physical with each other. Like, I mean, they threw my Aunt Nancy, or who was it, my Aunt Nancy or my mom? One of the girls got thrown through a sliding glass window at one point in time. You know what I mean? That's
scary.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Wow.
So they were very, and I know some other things happened to my mother as a child too. Like, her and her brother were walking to school, my Uncle Billy, and they were walking, I don't know exactly where, but someone took them off of the trail they were walking and molested them on the way to school, you know. So there's things in it, it was dysfunctional.
And there is a big difference between being born in a Christian, good family, and being born in a family who does not know God.
Oh yeah, I believe there is. I believe
And
there's a huge difference.
that's where you were born, and that's where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in a, like I said, my mom, she didn't expose us to Christ. She didn't encourage it, but she didn't not encourage it, you know. When I was in elementary school, yeah, that's when I was first exposed to the Word of the Lord, you know, with Bible study and then church. And it was lying. I liked it. But as I grew older, I drifted away from it because there was no expectations to continue forward to that, you know, like with my son, we have an expectation of him going to kids club, which is a Bible study. We have an expectation of him to suit up and go to church with us, you know, and we expect him to learn the word of the Lord, you know.
And there's probably some homework to do. And
well, we really don't, you know, we like him to read phrases and verses out of the Bible, and he's really smart, and children are very absorbent, so it's not as difficult for him to, you know, do memory verses and stuff like that as it would be for an adult. That's fully...
yeah, so you were back with your mom, you were about 12, 13. What happened next?
I was hanging around with boys, smoking marijuana, drinking, and
where was your mom at that point?
my mom was working and going to school at that time.
So she did not know.
She did not know. Yeah, she didn't know I was running around quite as much. As long as I had the house clean, dishes done, living room vacuum, dog taken care of, and I was, you know, home by the time she got home from work, because she worked in banquets, and then she went to school. She eventually gained her bachelor degree, you know. I was fine, you know. But I had SARB on my butt. Like, I've never been a morning person. I refused to wake up. I would refuse to go to school. So SARB would come and get me every morning and take me to school, you know, which it's a attendance program for kids that have poor attendance in school. So I went to an alternative school. Like I said, I was hanging around with the wrong kind of kids, boys mainly, and yeah, we'd drink and we'd have bonfires, we'd swim in the river, we just did whatever we wanted to do. And they would, as I went into high school, I met my daughter's father, and I was just about 14 years old, going into my freshman year of high school. I hung out with, they used to fight dogs, and my daughter's father would fight dogs. He had a big Rottweiler, and they would fight, and he also would fight chickens and stuff like that too. And everybody always told me, stay away from that man. You know, he's a womanizer, he's a manipulator. You know, and well, curiosity got the better of me eventually. You know, and you know, he had lots of weed. I was smoking weed at the time. He had lots of money. He was a drug dealer. He was super sweet and kind to me, you know, very flattering. And I didn't know any better. I had daddy issues. I was looking for that comfort and attention that I lacked so long in my childhood, I think. And so I became involved with this man, and he was 6.5 years older than me. I was 14 and he was 22, which at the time I didn't realize how wrong and inappropriate that was. Because I was so intrigued with the treatment and just the nice things and the nice ways that he treated me and the attention he gave me. You know, I felt special and needed and wanted, and I thought it was love, you know. So after a while of that, eventually, my mom didn't know for the longest time, not until it was really too late. And then I ended up becoming pregnant with him, and I went and I had a pregnancy test at the Planned Parenthood, and I came home and I said, hey, Grandma.
You told her?
I told my mom, yeah. There was no going around it.
Were you scared?
I was terrified. I was 14. Or no, 15. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was 15, absolutely terrified. I had my best friend Erica with me at the time.
So you knew you had to tell your mom. You knew there was something you couldn't hide.
Oh, yeah, no. I
You
just
knew you were in trouble.
I wasn't so much as in trouble as my mom was scared for me, overwhelmed. Teenage motherhood is a big thing. It's not an easy thing to do, because you haven't lived life. You don't have life experiences. You don't have the coping skills. There's just so many elements that is more complicated than what if you were to wait. Like when I had my son, I was much more mentally mature and able to be more patient, and I had already experienced so much of my wayward lifestyle that I was okay and kind of calmed down. When you're 16, you have no experience in life. You just haven't. You haven't seen anything. You haven't done anything. You haven't.
It just happened.
Yeah, your education is minimal. You have no work experience. There's just so many limitations to being a teenage mother, And not only that, it was an unhealthy relationship, physically, mentally, verbally. It was very unhealthy. But when I got pregnant is when he started putting hands on me and abusing me physically and mentally.
So did mom give you choices?
Yeah, when I came home told my mom that I was pregnant, she started crying, sobbing, crying, and she says, "Okay, well you have 3 options. You can have an abortion, you can adopt, or we can keep it." At that time, I was abortion, no way. That was murder in my eyes. It was and that's when my mom had told me for the first time ever that she had had an abortion when I was a baby, and I was so furious at her. Absolutely infuriated that she had killed a brother or sister of mine. I was so angry with her for a good minute. I was angry. I forgot about that. So I told her there's no way. I would never be able to murder my child. That's the way I saw it. I saw it as murder. Adoption, I knew I would have gained a bond and a closeness to the child that would have been unbreakable by the time of birth, So I was like, that's out of the question, So, yeah, our option is having the baby. I didn't know it was a her yet.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Things came a little difficult between me and my mom, because myself trying to claim my independence as a, because I was pregnant, I was having an intimate relationship with an older man, and my mom was still trying to, treat me as her little girl or her child, and I was, teenage rebellion. Yeah, she was trying to do her best. And so I left the house and I went and I stayed with my daughter's father. I said that's when it really started becoming abusive and controlling. In his culture, the way he was raised, women were to be seen and not heard. If there was more than 2 men in a room, you were to excuse yourself. His mother was my only friend. He controlled every aspect of my life. I wasn't able to go to school. I didn't have any friends other than...
You were just staying home.
All the time. Catering to his whims
But
and
he
will.
supported you financially.
Oh yeah, he took very well good care of me. I never wanted for anything. He was a drug dealer, so you would have people come in and they would boost things from stores, steal things from stores, and they would bring it to him because they wanted drugs from him. And so I pretty much had pick of anything and everything I wanted. He would buy and give me anything I wanted. I just didn't have freedom or a free mind or free, there's just things I didn't have that came along with that as well. But I needed for nothing. So I had my daughter when I was 16. She was born the exact day of her due date. She was a very difficult labor. My mom was there with me. He was there, but went home because he had actually went out the night before drinking. He physically abused me, right as I was in labor, right before I went to the hospital. Finally, I told him, "Fine, if you don't take me to the hospital, I'll walk to the hospital." And so finally he got up, just and took me to the hospital, and I was in labor for sure. So 23 hours later, forceps, very hard labor for a 16-year-old child. My little girl was born, beautiful. So I continued to live with my daughter's father for multiple years. when she, well, for multiple length of time. When she was 6 months old, it was Easter, and I was smoking marijuana, and I grabbed some weed and I rolled a joint, and I took my nieces, his nieces actually, because we were all the same age. And we didn't want their mothers to know that we were going to go smoke some marijuana, and so we went down to the river, and there was a family that was a rivaling family with them. There was like a family competition in the neighborhood. You know, one was trying to take over territory, and the other one had been there all their lives basically. And so they saw me, and you know, Jesse, my daughter's father, he liked to fight. He was good at it. He liked to spar and stuff like that. And so they were always arguing back and forth, these two families. And so two of the women that were part of the other family jumped me, and we were fighting physically. Yeah, and then as my daughter's family came down, and he came down, one of the male family members handed someone a gun and told him to shoot my daughter's family. So my daughter's father got shot 3 times and her uncle twice. And in the midst of all that, you know, his mother comes running down, and I'm just like, no, and she sees that, you know, I got hit in the eye, so I have a black eye, and she's hysterical. My boys, my boys, my boys. Very good woman, you know. And Jesse, my daughter's father, ended up disappearing. The neighbor stuck him in a car and ended up taking him to the hospital while the ambulance came for the brother. So we didn't know where Jesse was for the longest time until the neighbor came.
And you didn't know he was alive?
We didn't know what happened to him. We just know he had disappeared, but Nellie had taken him to the hospital.
But did you know he was shot?
Yeah, I witnessed them go down, all of them. It was very scary. I never experienced anything like that before in my life. And so he got really religious for a time, and we went to a Pentecost church. They told me that my daughter was going to burn in hell for my sins because we were living an unholy life. We weren't married, and I went to him just freaked out. You know, like, oh my gosh, you know. And so we got married in the church, but never legally. You know, so it was never law-abiding. It was never official.
But you did it just because
I was terrified. I didn't want my daughter to burn in hell.
Was that something you heard the first time in your life? Like,
yeah, I never heard of anything like that before. That my daughter was going to suffer for my sins and burn in hell. It was terrifying. I was 17, 16.
So at that point you knew, did you think it was like a normal life, or did you feel like you were doing something inappropriate?
They made me feel inappropriate. At first,
but before that,
I didn't know.
You just thought it was like cool life.
It was fine because he was the father of my child. My child was with us. I was a mother. You know what I mean? I wasn't aware of all of the laws and requirements for you know, a holy matrimony. You know, I didn't know a man should be married and all that stuff. It wasn't until much later in life that I actually grasped that concept. So we ended up doing that, and then after a while he started drinking again, and then he started getting physical again. And I was finally done. I didn't want my daughter to grow up thinking it was okay to have hands put on her by a man, because I watched my mother struggle with that, and I struggled with my stepfathers putting hands on me, you know. So I didn't want that for my daughter. I knew it was wrong. And I called my mom up and I said, Mom, come get me. So she was actually seeing somebody at the time, her third husband, future third husband. They met in college. And so she came and picked me up, and I took my clothes, my daughter's clothes, and my pictures. And I left. And that was it. And, you know, and he made all kinds of verbal statements like, you're gonna, you know what I mean? He literally mentally tortured me, because it was a hard enough decision already, you know. It was extremely hard. I cried for weeks. And I isolated, and it hurt. It was super painful.
Did he come to get you?
No. He was a manipulator, you know. He liked his freedom, even though he liked to control me too. Yeah. And that continued. He continued to mentally control and manipulate me for a great deal of my life. As my daughter was growing up, I allowed that because of my choices in life, you know. Because I didn't know that I had independence away from him, that he had no control over me, you know.
I thought it was normal.
I thought it was okay because after I left him, I experienced a whole new world of life, you know. I went out and I did things, and I partied, and people paid attention to me, and I experienced so many different things. I started doing meth. And at first it was just a weekend social thing, you know, something to make the party extend a little longer, the life of the party, you know, like I'd be able to party all weekend and not be tired.
So meth, it's something small.
Meth is something very big. It's an amphetamine. It gives you endurance. It prevents you from sleeping. It makes you feel invincible. And it makes you feel like you can do anything 10 times faster, 10 times stronger,
Really?
10 times longer.
Do you actually do things 10 times faster?
You think you do?
You think you do?
Yeah.
And how long, what was the longest period of time you couldn't sleep because of that?
I stayed up for 12 days at one time. Yeah, that was, and that's also, brings it, I was partying a lot, and that time I had stayed up for 12 days, and I had just gone to sleep, and a girlfriend of mine came and woke me up. It was New Year's. This is the year of the flood, so it was 96, I believe. And we went to a rave. And a rave is a huge dance party, and everybody's doing psychedelic drugs, you know. There's acid and ecstasy and anything you could possibly
So where
think of.
was this party held? At someone's house?
No, it was actually in a warehouse in the city in Oakland. Oh no, this one was in Oakland Coliseum. That was another rave. So I was at the Oakland Coliseum, and I had just done some acid and some ecstasy, so I was candy flipping.
So what's acid and
acid is a hallucinogenic. It makes you see things.
Smell it?
No, it's like a little piece of paper, and it's got a liquid on it, and you put it under your tongue, and it absorbs into your body, and it makes you hallucinate and see colors and trails, and it's a euphoric high, like your body, it just enhances everything 20 times.
How long does it last?
Anywhere from 12 to 24 hours.
So when you go to the party, you do that, you just kind
Do
of
that,
stay
and
there?
and you dance all night, and just have lots of fun, and yeah, it's a one big free-for-all, basically.
Like, are you aware that you need to go home? Are you able to
You
drive?
don't care. You know you can't drive.
You can't.
You're not supposed. I wouldn't suggest it.
Like, do people understand they cannot drive? Do they drive?
Some people just don't care.
They don't care.
Some
Do
people
they get
think
in the
that-
car accidents?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So I was at that party, and that one was closed down. And my best friend left me. She left me in Oakland, and so this man, he saved me. Like, he was just like out of nowhere, he appeared. He's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Ah." So he took me, and we ended up going to. And his friend saved another couple, and his friend saved 2 girls and a guy. And we all met up at their room, and they're like, "Well, let's go to Tahoe," you know. And so I was like, "I'm game," you know. My friend just left me here. Let's go. And so we ended up going to Reno because Tahoe was snowed in because of the weather and stuff. And I ended up losing them, hallucinating all over Reno. I mean, it was scary. Like, I thought all kinds of crazy things.
And where was your daughter at this time?
With my mom. And so my mom hadn't heard from me like for 3 days. And I'm stuck in Reno because we get snowed in because of the weather. And she put a national-wide search out on me. Like, she didn't know where I was. And it wasn't like me to not at least check on my daughter, you know. And so I was so out of my mind that I didn't even.
And you were there with people you.
Yeah, and then I lost
know.
them. Yeah, and I completely lost those people I came with, those strangers I came with that I met at the rave. And I ended up going home with complete strangers. I was lucky enough they were from the same area I was. But
did you have like money to pay them, or?
I was writing a bunch of hot checks.
Hot checks.
Hot checks. Yeah.
Oh, Rani.
Yeah. And I finally went to sleep. And when I went to sleep, all the people that were following me and all the things I was seeing, they just went away. And my state of mind kind of came back, you know, because I was suffering from not only the influence of drugs and hallucinogens, but also sleep deprivation.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's more scary now than then.
So you're saying when you use the drugs and you see things, is that like scary? Like people are gonna kill you? You feel like someone is running after you, or?
I felt like people were like police, you know, feds and stuff. I thought they were coming after me because I was writing hot checks. And I would see people in Reno that were actually here where I lived. There was no way. They were like, I could have sworn there was a waitress there, and she was a friend of mine that actually lived in Modesto. And so the people at the restaurant I was sitting at must have thought I was insane, you know?
You would talk to them like you know them.
Yeah. So, and I hid under a stairwell for like 3 hours thinking that there was informants running up and down the stairs looking for me, talking about me. Yeah, It was a trip. So I finally came home, and my mom told me, she put a nationwide search out on me. My mom was always very terrified that she would be called from the morgue to come down and identify my body when I was in my addiction, because I was one of the most extremist dope fiends I probably was. Extremely extremely promiscuous. I had no respect for my body or for myself. I didn't know my body was a gift, and I didn't know how to love myself. So throughout my addiction, I ended up going in and out of jail for the use of drugs, paraphernalia, possession, things like that. At one point in time, my mom was married to her husband. They lived out in Patterson. At one point in time, I was in jail, and I was at the honor farm. And this honor farm was actually it was a co-ed for men and women. And so they had the women in one barracks, and they had a bunch of men over here and a bunch of men over here in different barracks, fenced-in barracks. But they would walk us women through the two barracks and into an NPR room where we'd go and we'd find out what our daily job was. We'd go do laundry, we'd go do landscaping, things like that. And so they'd be walking us through, and one day I heard this man tell me, "Smile, it's not so bad." That was how I met my son's father, was incarcerated, which is really, that's.
How old were you at that point?
At that point in time, let's see, I had my son when I was 28, so I was probably 26, 27, somewhere around in there. And so I stayed in there. I was in there for quite some time, and we would correspond back and forth. So we formed a mental connection and a romance through pen and paper. Which I had never experienced before. It was there was a physical attraction, but it was more of a mental stimulation than anything, because we communicated more than I probably had ever communicated with a man in my life before. We shared likes and dislikes and experiences, and it was just.
And you were in a similar situation.
Yeah,
so
similar situation. Yeah. And I've always had a thing for foreign men. I think he was Hawaiian and Sioux Indian, so he had a very distinct look. And so I got out of jail 4/4 of 04, and I went home to my mom in Patterson. I hitchhiked from French camp. I was in a different county, and I came home to my mom, and my mom let me stay. She was going through divorce at the time to her husband, and this man, her husband, she actually was so madly in love with, and he was in recovery when they met, and then relapsed during the 10-year relationship that they had. And the relationship went out of control and changed. So I come home while they're in the midst of their separation, and my mom lets me stay there. Yeah, so I'm struggling with my addiction at this time. My mother lets me come home, and the man that I was incarcerated with, I gave him full descriptions of where I lived and how to find the place, and so he found it, and he came out, and we were intimate just that one time, and then he took me to work. I was waitressing at a restaurant out in Patterson where I lived. And I became pregnant. And I knew it instantly, basically. I knew 3 or 4 weeks after I had done it that I was pregnant. I just felt the difference immediately, which, I did the same thing with my daughter, too. I just knew, I could feel something different about me. And so after I missed my first period, I told my mom, hey.
And you lived with your mom at this point?
At the time, I was been staying with my mom. I was waitressing.
Daughter?
My daughter was still back and forth between it. My daughter has always had a relationship with my mom because my mom was more obviously structured and stable than I had ever been for my child during her childhood. And then she would be back and forth from my mom to her dad and grandma's. And somewhere in between there, I would be there, or you know what I mean?
And you said her dad's family was Hispanic.
Yes, they have very strong Hispanic culture background. My daughter speaks Spanish. She has lots of family on her father's side. He was the baby of 12 children. So she's got lots of cousins and lots of connection there. I don't really have a large family or any type of family connections and experiences because I never had that in life.
You only have one sister.
I have 2 sisters. I have one from my father too. Actually, I have more. I have 2 sisters from my father and a brother from my father. But my younger brother and my younger sister I've never met. My other little sister is the same age as my sister from my mom. I met once. So yeah, I have siblings, but my sister Silver, my mom's daughter, is who I grew up with. Yeah, so my daughter is back and forth with us, and I come to my mom and I tell my mom that I'm pregnant. And she obviously gives me those options again. We have abortion, we have adoption, or we'll figure it out, you know. And I considered, I don't know if this part caught or not, but like when I was in my addiction strongly, something had happened to my child. You know, she was abused and mistreated, and
Your daughter.
my daughter, yeah. And I blamed myself, and I was in my addiction, and the police blamed me, and everybody else blamed me, and it was my fault. It was my lifestyle and choices that brought that situation into my life. And so at that time, I had met a man. I was seeing a man, and he was a drug dealer and going to prison. I became pregnant by him, and I aborted that child. And I know he was my son. It was one of my sons, you know. And he would have been 18 at this time. So I halfway considered aborting my son now that I have. But my mom had found God and was very involved within a church at that time, and begged me not to, that we would figure it out, that everything.
But you had thoughts of abortion.
I definitely was thinking of aborting because I was scared. I was alone.
And your lifestyle, you knew.
My lifestyle, and I was alone again. There was no man involved in my life. You know, we were intimate one time, and then he was gone. I didn't see him or hear from him or anything, you know, and so I was scared. And during this time, my mom was experiencing, you know, a separation from her husband, and she was on Xanaxes and anti-anxieties and stuff like that. And she overdosed on some Xanaxes. Very addictive. Very, they're very dangerous.
Basically, drugs the doctors prescribe.
Basically, yes.
Whoa, and she
Pharmaceutical
overdosed.
drugs, yeah, and she overdosed on it and had like a mental breakdown.
Like she overdosed just by mistake or on purpose?
She
or
took a whole bottle of Xanax, which is extremely dangerous.
Was it just because she couldn't handle it anymore?
Yeah, her mental stability was, she was so heartbroken over her husband. She truly loved this man. And it just really, it really broke her up and destroyed her inside, you know, emotionally. She went into a rehab. And so she was there for 28 days. And within that 28 days, I was so terrified, and I still had a lot of addictive mentality and addict's way of thinking.
So at that point you decided you're not going to abort the baby.
I'm not going to abort the baby, I'm going to keep the baby. But when my mom overdosed, I saw that as an opportunity of God's will. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to go use drugs again. Because I had some sobriety time, you know. I was trying to battle with recovery. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go use drugs for these 28 days that my mom is in rehabilitation. And if God takes this baby from me, so be it. And if God doesn't, I will be right by this child from here on out after my mom gets home from rehab. Well, I was already receiving prenatal care from a physician, you know, and I had shared my history of addiction with them. So I didn't even realize that they were testing my urine, because I would have to give them a urine sample every time I came in. And I didn't do that with my daughter. And so, but I didn't think anything of it, you know what I mean? I figured it was because of my previous addiction, that they were just trying to monitor my, you know, my pregnancy a little closer because of my addiction. Well, I ended up testing positive for marijuana and methamphetamines. And this was, it was in my second trimester. And they said, okay, so a public health nurse is going to come out to your house. You're going to be, like I was supervised for the rest of your pregnancy, and you'll be supervised for a year after your child was born. And I was like, oh my gosh, my mom and my sister are going to find out.
So you knew they found out.
I knew they were going to find out. So I had my mother's car, and I ended up taking my mom's car and hiding out. Like, I put her car under tarps and everything because I was terrified. I turned my phone off so that they couldn't find me. And I was out in my elements of addiction, using even, nobody knew I was pregnant either. So,
Mhm.
you know, these people that were doing drugs with me didn't know I was pregnant. Didn't know exactly what was going on, but they knew, they knew I was doing bad. You know, I was hiding out. But they helped me, you know, so my mom was scared to death and worried, and my sister was so angry with me because when I came home, I ended up coming home on my daughter's 10th birthday. Because I knew it was time. And when I came home, my sister was so infuriated with me.
So
She was like,
you knew it was important to be there for her.
yeah, my daughter's 10. Yeah, my daughter, even though I may have not have been the best parent or mother, like my love has never been anything but pure. You know, I've always had nothing but love. But when you're in your addiction, you're selfish and self-centered, and it supersedes anything of any one of your desires. You know, you may want to be there for your children and do for your children, but the desire to feed your addiction is overpowering. You know, you can't fight that desire. It's extremely hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something you have to feed constantly. So I came home, and my sister, like I said, she was furious with me. My mother was more consoling and you know, compassionate, but she's like, "How dare you? That baby has no choice." You know what I mean? My sister's a nurse, you know, so she was just. I went into rehab that very next day, and I stayed clean for almost 5 years. I had my son. I was very isolated. The only people I really hung around with was my mother. We moved out of the house that we were in. The divorce was finalized. We had our own place. I did what they wanted me to do with the public health nurse. You know, I met with her regularly, and I did everything that they required of me. I had my son. I had to be induced. He didn't want to come out. He wanted to stay in mama. He was nice and warm. So they induced me, and I had him March 19th, 2005. And he was healthy. He was beautiful.
Yeah. He is beautiful today. He's what? 12?
He's 12 years old today. Very strong-willed boy. Very independent, very creative. He's a good boy. I'm grateful.
Rani, I have this question for you. Like, I know on one side there are drugs, there's all this mess, but on the other side, single mom. How hard is that?
It's hard. It's lonely. A lot of it, like with Caden, my heart always broke for him because I know what a good kid he is, and I know that, you know, he so deserved a father figure and a man in his life that wanted to be there because he's such a good kid. You know, that's something that always broke my heart because he never had that. He just had me. He's been surrounded and raised by women all his life. You know, and that gives him a sensitivity and you know, he's very passionate. But I always felt that was unfair for him, you know.
Did you ever feel like you were overwhelmed with your life? That you couldn't do this anymore? I'm a single mom, I'm in trouble.
You know, when I was clean and sober, no. Because I had my mom and, you know, even though, you know, after a year of breastfeeding him and just being me and him, I met a man. And I became in a relationship with this man, and I started drinking, and I smoked marijuana. And it wasn't so difficult then either. But then me and him, he didn't have any children. He was a very selfish person. Like, he wanted all my attention, you know, and he just couldn't grasp the concept of you know, you can't do that. You know, I'm a mother, and
you have a child.
Yeah.
You have 2 children.
Yeah, and so it became you know, a rocky relationship, and finally I just had enough, and I told him, go, leave, you know, I don't need you. And that's when I started drinking even heavier, and going to bars and clubs all the time, and my daughter, who was 10, 11, and 12, would babysit, and, you know, and she had no choice. I didn't give her a choice not to. I told her she did. I was extremely depressed. I was a binge drinker, a pot smoker, lonely. and I ended up starting to do coke again. That's how I started my addiction again. Cocaine after being in recovery for so long. I was in dry recovery, is what they call it, because I wasn't doing my drug of choice, but I was still drinking and smoking marijuana, smoking cigarettes.
And cocaine?
Yeah, so I started doing cocaine again, because I was just so drunk.
And what do you do with that?
I snorted it personally, but you can do it. You can snort it, you can smoke it, you can shoot it, and it's cocaine is a natural it's a natural drug. It's a cocoa leaf, and they produce the cocaine out of that. When methamphetamines, crystal, it's a man-made. It's poisons. I mean, they're all poisons, but one is from nature and one is created by chemicals underneath your sink. And so I started doing that, but I didn't like the way cocaine would numb my throat, and then it would make me feel like I had a cold. I would call it the 3-day cold. And so I went back to what I knew. And cocaine's high is not as long as what crystal meth would be. The extent of the high is so much different. And so I went back to what I knew, and I started doing crystal again, meth. And that's where it all started for my addiction again. Except for this time, instead of being a dope fiend, I was a drug addict. I mean, a drug dealer. And I sold a lot of drugs. I sold large quantities of drugs.
Did you ever bring those drugs home?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Could kids get hold of it?
I would keep them in a safe, and I always had like a bag, that had everything I needed. My bags to sell drugs, my scales, my paraphernalia to do my drugs, stuff like that.
So if the police ever came to your house and found it, what would happen to you?
I would go to jail.
For a long time?
I have gone to jail because police probation. And luckily they didn't find any large quantity of drugs at that time or anything like that. They just found a pipe, and my room was clouded from smoke because I was smoking. And my son was playing with the neighbor, and they took me to jail. My son had to call my mom to come get him.
How old was he?
6, maybe? Yeah. Yeah, so... And they had to come and they arrested me right in front of them.
And how old was your daughter at that point?
Oh, at that point she was
17?
She was at the age of a headache. She was 17, somewhere around there. This is when she had already met her daughter's father at this time. Her
Was
children's
she still
father.
with you or with him?
Back and forth. We were arguing a lot.
And why were you arguing a lot?
Well, because she was making choices like I made, smoking marijuana, hanging out with boys.
So you were doing the bad stuff, and you were trying to tell her not to.
Right. No, I would give her marijuana just to get her out of my hair.
Really?
Yeah. And when I would crash out and go to sleep, and my customers would come by the house, she would put rubber gloves on and she would weigh my product out and get rid of it for me because I was sleeping and couldn't conduct business, and she knew that's how we survived. So my daughter was exposed to a lot of elements, not only through childhood but teenage life, and as a young adult she's been through so much too. So yeah. So after that, I was a drug dealer. I was in a relationship with a notorious Keys boy, as they would call him, which are he was a group of boys from a little town, and they were very well known for their brutality and their criminal activity. And so as being a drug dealer, there's a lot of dangerous aspects of that, especially the quantity of drugs I carried on me, the quantity of drugs I got rid of, and the element of people that I hung around with. There could have been a lot of different ways my life could have turned. I could have been robbed. I was in a relationship with a notorious criminal man, and he was in jail.
And you were 26.
No, I had already had my son, so I was in my 30s at this time.
And you were dealing with teenagers, like people who would use drugs.
Teenagers, drug addicts, drug dealers, all different elements.
Experienced.
Oh yeah. I was definitely a veteran. So at this time, the man that I'm involved with, he's incarcerated. And I would send him drug letters through mail into the jail facilities. And when he was in prison, I would send him heroin documents, like they would be vanilla folders with court documents in it, and I would roll out a gram of heroin so thin, and I would tape it to a court document, like thick documents, you know, and I would mail it to him under false pretenses that it was like from a lawyer or something like that, and that's how he would get his heroin into prison. And the size of a matchstick of heroin goes for a good amount of money in the prison facilities and stuff. So I pretty much took care of him in prison, out of prison, you know, all to be it was just, he was just using me, you know, to get what he needed for his own lifestyle and way of life.
Did you know he was using you?
Not at the time. At the time I thought I was in love.
Were you in love?
Yeah, I was in love. Yeah, I thought I was anyways. I don't think I've really experienced what real love is until I met my husband. Now my husband.
And who's now your husband?
My husband now, his name is Vladimir Anushenko.
Vladimir Anushenko, that's my husband's brother.
That is your husband's brother.
I think we're going to meet him in a few minutes, but let's finish what happened to you next before you...
Okay, so I was a drug dealer. I was being, at this time I'm in and out of jails. And not because I've been charged with multiple different offenses or anything, it's because I was a catch me if you can kind of girl. I was on probation, and I would violate my controlling cases. And if you violate, they'll bring you to jail, you know, because you're supposed to, of course, you're supposed to do what they want you to do. You're supposed to have communication with them and report to them and do what, you know, you're a property of the government if you are on probation. You have no real free will.
Yeah.
You're, you know, you answer to the law.
Basically, you become no free anymore.
Basically, yeah.
You're not a free person.
You're definitely not a free person. Especially if you have to answer to the authorities.
You lose your freedom.
You lose your freedom. Yeah, and there's so many other things that, you know, like if you are in contact with someone that has been incarcerated or prison or has a criminal background, like you have a criminal background, that's also a charge, you know, that's against the law. You're not allowed to hang around with people that are like you, which when you're a person like that, those are all the people you hang around with, are people like you. So I was in and out of jail all the time on probation, violations and stuff like that. And at this time, let's see, I lost my house. I lost the man I thought I loved. I was at a loss of life. You know, I was extremely depressed and suicidal, and I began to hate life. I would have good points and bad points. My career, my drug dealing career would have a high and then a low. It's a very iffy type of endeavor in life, you know. And so, you know, I myself, when I go to jail, I bring quite a large quantity of drugs sometimes in jail, and that's just how it was.
So you would go visit?
No. I would go visit jail. I would be in jail, and I would bring. I was lucky enough never to be caught with any large amount of quantity of drugs on me, and that's because I would hide the drugs so well the cops couldn't find it. I'm not gonna, go into detail of how you do that, but it's degrading and it's unhealthy and it's unsafe, and people do it all the time. You know, but it kept me from being charged with trafficking, with sales, you know, to where I only kept that misdemeanor, and which was a felony which eventually turned into a misdemeanor for me, praise God. I didn't have those massive felonies on my criminal record. So
if they cut you, you would have had some.
Oh yeah,
right?
I wouldn't have had the opportunities I can still have that I do now if they would have caught me with the quantities that I used to have on me, and yeah, it would have been all bad. So I'm at the end part of my addiction, basically. I don't want to be a disappointment to my son anymore. I have my daughter who had just had my first grandchild. You know, like my granddaughter will never experience me as a drug addict. Like, she'll never know that part of me, and she'll never know that person that I was because of who I am today. So I was at a football practice with my son, and I needed to get high. I was at a low point in my life, And my sister was there.
So tell me this feeling, you need to get high. Like, what happens to you? You can't concentrate.
You're
That's
exhausted, you can't concentrate, you need...
Is that all you can think about at that
pretty
point?
much.
You don't really care about your son?
Yeah, I don't care about his football practice. I don't care what he wants after football practice. I don't care that he wants and needs me. I just need to go and get high. I need to do the drug of my choice. And so I told my sister, you know, you got him? And she was like, pfft, you know,
She knew.
oh yeah, so yeah, my sister's very aware of my previous lifestyle.
Has she ever done drugs or not?
She's experienced and experimented with drugs, but she's never been a full-blown drug addict.
But she understood you.
She knew what I was. She knew the lifestyle I lived. You know, she knew how harmful it was. I mean, she had been raising my child for so many years after I went back out into the elements, you know. So she was like, yeah, so I left. And praise God that I left my son with her and my dog was somewhere else. Because I went and I got high, and as I was driving away and driving to another destination, I ended up getting pulled over because my tags were expired, my brake light was out. I lied to him and told him I wasn't under the influence. I had been clean for a little bit of time, and I had a warrant out for my arrest with over $100,000 bail. $100,000 bail. And that was just a local warrant. Yeah, so they took me to jail.
They were looking for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of time, you know, that before you get caught up, if you have a warrant or any type of criminal background. If you're going to continue to live that lifestyle, it's just a matter of time before you get caught up by the law. You know what I mean? It's a cat and mouse game. So they arrested me and took me to jail and pounded my car. And at that point in time, let's see, I was in H unit, which is a facility where they keep you and hold you before they figure out what they want to do with you. And I had two crazy roommates. One was younger, one was older. One was on drugs still, and the other was just kind of crazy. And so they came and went. And then my third roommate, she was a turn-in. So she had done something in her past and went to court to rectify it, and they gave her a date to turn herself in, and that's what she did. She was a member of a locally known church called The House, and I know God sent her there for me. I know God knew it was time for me to change, that He knew that I was ready for change, because He put her there in my life, and she started sharing about God. And at this time, you know, for the longest time, I was an atheist. For everything that I had experienced and everything that I had went through, I was angry at God. I didn't understand Him. I didn't want to understand Him. I just blamed Him for everything.
And you didn't understand that what you were doing sometimes was wrong. Yeah,
I didn't understand. Well, I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I didn't know why God would allow other things to happen in lives if He was the Almighty God. Why would He allow those people to do those type of things to certain children or other people, or, you know, just life circumstances? You know, I didn't know about free will of man, you know, and I didn't know of God's protection when man's will, you know, exceeded his desires. So she started telling me about God, and that's like I said, I knew He sent her there for me. And I asked the Lord for forgiveness, and I asked Him into my heart, and I told Him I wanted to change and that I wanted different, but I didn't know how. And you know, He freed me of my withdrawals. Like, I didn't experience withdrawals like I had experienced before from being under the influence of my choice of drug, which is amazing, you know, because it's a very uncomfortable feeling. Like, the lower half of my body would sweat and I would chill, and it was an uncomfortable sleeping experience. It would keep you up. I'd be hot, but I'd be cold. And like I said, my whole body, lower body half would just sweat profusely. You're very fatigued and tired. You have no desire or want to do anything, you know. But then after a while, your body becomes so sore because you sleep so much, you know.
And how long does that last?
Oh, goodness gracious. You know, it takes you 28 days to become addicted to a drug, and it takes you 28 days for your body to become unaddicted. But the mental and physical recovery, it just varies. It just depends. Like, I ran really hard for a really long time. So they say that the mental balance, the chemical balance of your brain doesn't repair itself for at least 2 to 3 years after recovery. So that stable, the stability of your brain and chemical balance is very, iffy during recovery for those first 2-3 years. But
so in jail, you're saying you had no withdrawals?
I had no withdrawal experiences, which was amazing because any other time that I went to jail, I always had withdrawals.
For that withdrawal, did you feel like it was God?
I knew it was God.
Did you feel His presence?
Oh,
What
yeah.
happened? You said you prayed.
I prayed, I asked, I cried. And then me and that woman, we conversated and talked about the Lord and what His desires.
She told you what was
shared
going on.
yeah.
She told you how to repent, how to ask for forgiveness.
She just shared the good news of the Lord.
Okay.
With me and my faith, I'm not well versed in the Bible, and I'm not. My memory of scripture is not extensive. My husband is amazing. He can recite the Bible and scripture. Yes, yes, my husband today. My only husband, my first husband.
Yeah.
He's amazing. He's very biblically. He has a lot of knowledge biblically. With me, it's more of a blind faith, because I've experienced His grace, and I've experienced the change that can happen when you draw close to the Lord. She shared the good news of the Lord. She let me know that He was waiting for me, and that all my sins could be forgiven, and I could live a different way, and that He would help and guide me.
And you
as long as
her.
I knew, I just knew this time. I knew I wanted something different, and I knew nothing
else.
else worked. So what other choice did I have but to give God a chance?